what COVID-19 has done is it's reinforced many of the regressive cultural tendencies to do with symbolic boundaries. And the example that I want to bring to your attention, which occurred after I finished writing the book, it would happen before I would have written a chapter on it, is the way in which in recent weeks, the boundary between the present and the past, is being called into question, where all of a sudden, sort of thousands of people are trying to sort of fix the problems of the past by going around and toppling statues. Where all of a sudden, people are, sort of having, very strong views about how people behaved 250 years ago. And it's become very fashionable now to give little lectures to criticize, George Washington, weren't you aware of the importance of gay marriage? And George Washington, what was your position on LGBTQT kind of issues? It's almost as if we're kind of, in a condescending way, reading history backwards. And instead of realizing that, they've gone, that was 200 years ago, the past is the past, we live in the present, there's a clear boundary between them, we kind of very sort of promiscuously destroying that very important boundary. So we become lost in this world where the present and the past almost surreptitiously intermesh.
But don't you think that what has happened over the past month or so that you've been describing, that has arisen out of people being lost anyway? It's not they're trying to be lost. In other words, they have no sense of history. You must have had these conversations, I certainly have, with people who don't quite understand what I mean when I say, but you can't judge someone from 500 years ago and what they think about LGBT, as you say, or slavery even, actually. You can't do that. They don't understand what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're lost, but it isn't just simply a question of not understanding it. I think that at least a section of the establishment, particularly in the cultural sector, is very conscious about the need to distance our communities and our people from their history, to detach them from the legacy of the past. I think that is a project that has been going on for some time, where you systematically call into question any redeeming feature that, for example, British history could have. So it's interesting that you kind of, now regard Winston Churchill, who's probably the most significant historical symbol of Britishness, and you kind of turn him into this petty criminal who is single-handedly responsible for the famine in Bengal, and who's, is the most racist individual in the world. And you erase his role in terms of mobilizing society to stand up to the Nazis. That becomes relatively unimportant. And what you're doing in that sense is you're diminishing Britain's heroic episode during Second World War. You turn that into a kind of a mundane, minor historical footnote. That's what you do. And then you do that with everything, because what you also call into question is, Lincoln. We used to think that Lincoln was a really good guy, for abolishing slavery. Now we kind of want to topple down his statue because, he might have had some kind of blemishes on his historical record. So what we're basically doing is creating a year zero notion of history. A year zero where anything that's possibly good begins now, and it begins with the toppling of statues, and it begins with, getting rid of labels of Aunt Jemima, of food packages, and anything that has preceded before then is like the bad old days, not the good old days. It's just the bad old days. Nothing good about it. It's just bad, and I think that is more than just being lost. That is an attempt to deprive society of its signposts, its historical signposts.
How seriously do you take what's been happening?
Very seriously. I think that two things come to mind. As usual, The real problem for me is the reaction to what's happening, and the kind of moral cowardice of the authorities, and the reluctance to basically hold the line. In fact, there is no line to hold as far as they're concerned, because that boundary, even the boundary that sort of exists between the rule of law and the breaking of law, is now open to question, and is quite debatable. And when that occurs, when you have, for example, the police, in a sense, dancing with demonstrators, as they did in Extinction Rebellion, or taking the knee, as they've done in the more recent BLM demonstrations, instead of behaving as police officers, they basically pretend to be regular guys, who have no special responsibility for the maintenance of water. So you got, on the one hand, that kind of cowardly response, where at every single step, I think it's probably best personified by the Archbishop of Canterbury, just a Welby, who, in a sense, casually says, well, we're not sure whether Jesus Christ was white. In fact, he probably wasn't white, because he was born in the Middle East. So that's the end of the discussion. And then he says, oh, we're setting up this review board to decide which statues can be toppled over in our churches, which ones we no longer need anymore, and just like kind of out of the blue. So you have, I live near Canterbury, this beautiful Canterbury Cathedral, with dozens and dozens of beautiful historical statues and figures. They've been there. They've been part of the cathedral for centuries. They are what makes the cathedral. And if Welby has his way, well, the cathedral is going to look like a bowling alley. There'll be so much space there when all those kind of statues are removed that you might as well set up a bowling alley there, because that will have more theological significance than what will be left after he's done his business.